I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. Big victory over Kentucky in the swamp, 48-20. The Gators. Man, Will, it felt like you were watching the Gators on Saturday night. It really felt like the old school Gators that were running around, throwing the ball around a bit, having some fun. Although, unbelievably, as many big plays as we saw, DJ Lagway in his first SEC start completes only 7 passes, and it just felt like he was lighting the place up when you're watching it. But 7 of 14, 259 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. The star of the night outside of Lagway was Jaden Baugh, the freshman running back, 22 carries, 106 yards, 5 touchdowns. Really some hard runs along the goal line. Jackson got a couple carries too on the night. Just some hard running backs there in the backfield, Will. But Ball in particular, those 5 touchdowns, quite a feat for two freshmen starting in the at the running back and quarterback position side by side for the first time in school history.
Yeah, I mean, look, I picked Florida to lose. I thought Florida was going to struggle a little bit on offense, and it turns out that when you put DJ Lagway back there and he hits explosive after explosive after explosive, that all of a sudden you look like one of those teams that just destroys Kentucky like we did a decade ago. I mean, I can remember Luke Del Rio going out and lighting up Kentucky, and it's not like Del Rio was anybody we're going to be bouncing our grandkids on our knees telling anybody about. And that's just sort of always been the expectation for Florida against Kentucky. It's not that Kentucky's been bad. It's just, and Kentucky has been bad sometimes, but it's not that Kentucky's always been bad. It's that Florida has been a level above or 2 levels above pretty much at all times. And for the last 3 seasons, at least, Florida's come back to that pack with Kentucky. And so to be able to go out there and not just win, but win convincingly. And, they gave up the kickoff return for the touchdown that made it a
Mm.
lot closer than it could have been. Certainly, they did get the goal line stop after the interception by Lagway. That was a huge part of the defense. And really, obviously Lagway is one of the stories here and probably the main story, but also the defense looked fantastic for the third straight week. You go back and you rewatch, and you and I were talking about this via text this afternoon. You go out and you watch, and there were some throws that Vandegrift left out there. And I think if you go back and look at the tape against Central Florida, there were some throws that KJ Jefferson left out there. There were definitely some throws that Nico left out there for Tennessee. So as the schedule gets harder, as the quarterbacks get better, I'm going to be really interested to see whether the defense can keep it up. But Aaron Gates and Pup Howard all over the place. You had Jaden Robinson playing really well at the linebacker position. I think people have sort of gravitated toward the idea that Florida's defense has been more aggressive. It hasn't been more aggressive. When you look at some of the stats that we get from Sports Info Solutions, they're playing a lot of light box and they're just winning up front. And that isn't something that Florida has been able to do for years now. And so to see guys winning individual battles on the defensive side of the ball, but now we're seeing guys win individual battles on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned you mentioned Baugh, you mentioned Lagway, but you got to mention DK and Badger as well. I mean, Trey Wilson has basically been demoted to a distraction at this point, and Badger is leading the country in yards per catch, and he's got like 22 or 23 catches, so it's not like it's on a low volume. DK is up there as well. They're both averaging over 30 yards per catch
Mm.
when they're catching it from Lagway. So, Florida's kind of got everything in place here to at least give us hope moving forward. And all I've talked about in the entire Billy Napier era, and really in the Dan Mullen era as well, is recruiting or winning as a way of providing hope to the fan base. And this was always my contention about why Lagway should be starting. There were other reasons in terms of film and profile and all that sort of stuff, but the real reason was you weren't even there was no hope that you could beat Georgia or Texas or Ole Miss or LSU. And certainly that gauntlet was really daunting with Graham Mertz. And that's not a knock on Mertz. It's a recognition that the offense needs to be more than what Mertz was able to provide. Now, we'll talk about Lagway tonight, I'm sure, about some of the ups and downs. And this was an up against Kentucky. We'll see if he can maintain that going forward, not just against better opponents, but also because he has been up and down this year. And it's entirely possible that next time he goes out there, it'll be a down. And I don't want people to be disappointed when that happens. I think it's just a recognition that, the second half against Kentucky, it's possible that that's what DJ Lagway can be. But then also the game against Kentucky, specifically the second half against Kentucky, where he threw three passes and averaged what 36 yards per pass on those three throws. That also is what DJ Lagway can be. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of space for development. That's one of the reasons I'm sure why Billy Napier didn't put him out there earlier. But man, the fact that he just goes for it irrespective of what the ramifications are going to be. Sometimes that's going to turn into picks. Sometimes that's going to turn into plays where you sort of, hit your forehead and go, what was he thinking? But a lot of times it's going to turn into a 50-yard pass to Elijah Badger or a 40-yard pass to Shamir DK or, maybe even pretty soon 12-yard passes to Trey Wilson or to the running backs. And as he learns to check down when what's there isn't available, man, is he going to be dangerous because we know he's not going to be afraid to go take the shots. I mean, he throws the interception and he's right back out there chucking the ball deep again. Right after that interception, Kentucky comes down and scores a touchdown to pull within 7 after the first drive of the second half. And what does he do? He comes out and he hits two explosives to DK to set up a touchdown to put him up by 14. It was like pedal to the gas pedal is dead at all times with that guy. And that's the difference. I mean, the difference is that we've gone from a quarterback who's had an average depth of target the last couple of weeks of like 5.7 in Graham Mertz, and necessary, right? Mertz has needed to sort of be that guy and not throw the ball very far and be really, really accurate and efficient to get the Gator offense to move anywhere. DJ Lagway had an average depth of target of 23 yards per throw past the line of scrimmage the other down, 14 throws. So yeah, he was 7 of 14. He only had 50% completion percentage. But that's because he was throwing 25 yards down the field every time he chucked the ball. And if you do that, right? I mean, if you complete 50% of your passes when you're throwing it 20 yards downfield, you're going to make a bunch of explosives. And that's what we saw. We saw, 7 explosives in this game, 1 on the ground and then 6 in the air. And, every time you get an explosive, you almost always convert that into points, and Florida was able to do that against Kentucky.
Well, let's talk about that ground game. Obviously, Lagway, big night through the air, a lot of big plays, ton of fun to watch. But that ground game, Will, one of the things you immediately notice, I mean, you come out the first drive, Lagway's running a couple times. One of them, the first play, I believe it was called pass, and he just rolled out and saw the opening and took it. And then there's a couple other plays though where I just really caught my eye of how much respect the defense gives him on a lot of these like reads, right? So he's doing like a lot of RPO stuff. He'll read the end man on the line, but you have a linebacker that cheats out to the outside to cover the run with the quarterback. You have a defensive tackle that maybe he doesn't crash as hard. So you have this opening that not only gives the offensive line more space to work, but it gives the running back more room to breathe and translates into a night like you saw from a guy like Jaden Baugh, who's a hard runner anyway, but you give him a little daylight, and I mean you can see a big day like you saw on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's two things there. One is that Lagway's ability to go deep opens up things underneath in terms of the running game. But the other part is that the threat that he exhibits there in the running game then opens things up as well. I think it was Nick Marcinko, one of the Florida beat writers, who was looking at essentially the yards per rush for Florida went out of I can't remember exactly what the tweet was, but he was basically looking at how they rushed when Graham Mertz was in the game and how they rushed when DJ Lagway was in the game. And granted, the offense has struggled, and in this one they didn't. So it's a little bit unfair to compare those sorts of things. At the same time, the reality is that yes, a read option quarterback, somebody who can run an RPO, somebody who can run the read option, hold that defensive end from crashing, that does more than just holding that defensive end. It frees up your offensive line to really start pushing downfield. And look, I mean, when Kentucky knew Florida was going to run the ball in the second half, they couldn't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And Florida kind of established that early on. They settled for field goals in that first quarter on a couple of drives, but those were drives where they basically said, "We're going to run the ball."
Run the
And
what?
what? Run the ball.
Run the ball?
Run the ball. There you
Run
go.
the
Run the
ball.
ball. So we're not from New York. I don't know what you're talking about here, but
Talk
yeah.
about a running back that just put it in the end zone 5 times. Show a little respect.
Well,
Jeez.
look, I think Baugh did a nice job. I'm not ready to like anoint him the best running back Florida's ever had after this game. It's not that difficult to punch it in the like Lagway and DK and Badger did a lot of the work to set up Jaden Baugh to be able to punch it in the end zone. Now, Florida hasn't been a very good red zone team either, so Baugh's ability to stick it in there is certainly an important piece of the puzzle. And then he's also been their best in pass protection, and so you're going to need a running back who can step up and who can take on that blitzing linebacker and make sure he doesn't get there and all that sort of stuff because Lagway is going to hold the ball. Lagway is going to sit there and dance around the pocket and wait for things to come open and be ready to take that deep shot. He has to keep his eyes downfield, and he's going to need a guy like Ball in there. So, you think about there was a rep, I think it was either against it was against Central Florida, where Baugh stepped up and took on a blitzing linebacker and freed it up. And it was actually a throw for Graham Mertz, but he freed up the quarterback to be able to make that throw. And I think that aspect of it is probably just as important as his ability to run the ball from the standpoint of we want Lagway to stand in there. We want him to have the opportunity to go deep. And that also helps Baugh because the more Lagway goes deep and the more success he has going deep, the more the running game's going to open because those safeties are going to have to start backpedaling. And when those safeties backpedal, if you get past the linebackers, well, now all of a sudden you got an opportunity to turn what might have been an 8 or 9 yard run when the safety comes up to make a tackle into a 30 or 40 yard run because the safety is going to be forced to sort of take a bad angle, kind of be on his heels, and you're going to really be able to get ahead of steam before you hit him. Now, we didn't see that. We saw one explosive play when they were pinned deep, actually, after the stop after the goal line stop from Florida's defense, but I think that's coming. As the defenses start looking at the tape, as the defenses start saying, we're going to have to play more shell coverage against DJ Lagway to prevent him from going deep. The answer is going to be you got to run him out of that shell coverage. And Montreal Johnson when he comes back, but then Baugh and Jackson and Trayon Webb when he comes back as well are going to be key to being able to do that because Florida's finally going to have a numbers advantage in the box and they need to be able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, think about that running back room though. No Johnson, no Webb, and then obviously we got another running back that's playing that we're going to be seeing in Jacksonville a couple weeks here. So last year, that running back room versus what you saw on the field against Kentucky on Saturday night, that's a deep room. That's a deep room if you're seeing that type of performance out there. And certainly, I do think Lagway, his presence helps it. 44 rushes, 197 yards for the Gators. They put up 476 yards on the night. Let's flip over to that defensive side of the ball. Will 311 total yards for the Wildcats, 165 through the air. I really did think that Vandergriff missed some good opportunities at times. He's a great athlete. He can move around for a guy his size. He can move pretty well, but just not consistent enough. Not consistent enough, and you definitely see why he was not the starter at Georgia. 3 interceptions on the night. I know one of them was the tip pass to one of them was the tip pass to Bridges. Great play in the secondary, but the pick six at the end from Cormani McLean was probably one of the best moments of the season because it was just you saw the team just go have a good time. This has been a hypercritical. You got podcasts like us. Everybody's hypercritical of this team and frustrated with where it's been. That was just a raw moment where a guy that has had a rough career in college to this point, what percentage of it is self-inflicted? We don't know, but a rough career to this point gets a moment like that where he gets on the field. You saw the injury to Marshall throughout the game. So you get these young guys in the secondary stepping up. McLean steps in, gets that opportunity and picks it off and takes it to the house. And again, the touchdown just sealed the deal, put the Gators up to 48 on the night. But it was a cool moment seeing all of his teammates run off the bench. And after where they cut to Billy Napier, he's smiling on the sideline. Just a good moment for this team that I'm sure that everybody on that sideline really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you start looking at the guys who are making plays. It's the Aaron Gates of the world. It's the
He
Sharif
was
Densons.
phenomenal, by the way. Aaron
Absolutely.
Gates was
And this
phenomenal.
isn't the first time. He stayed
Yeah.
home on a reverse a couple of weeks ago against Central Florida, where I was like, okay, like that guy is showing a discipline that we haven't seen before. But again, you look at the Aaron Gates of the world, you look at the Sharif Densons of the world, you look at the Jaden Robinsons of the world. These are not guys that we said these guys need to step up for this defense to move forward. I mean, we looked at the Asa Turners and the DJ Douglases. I was really high on the safety room, and it turns out Triquez Bridges has been a difference maker. Last year during the Georgia game, Florida flipped the ball out on the flat, and a Georgia defensive back came up and made a tackle. And you texted me at the time and go, "When's the last time you saw a Florida defensive back make an actual open field tackle?" Well, we've seen it now because Triquez Bridges did it on a huge stop for the defense there, where if Kentucky had been able to convert, then who knows where that game would have gone. But instead, the defense stepped up and made a play. Guys like Pup Howard, who have come in and played well all year long, but this is a transfer, comes in and all of a sudden is the best linebacker that Florida has. I mean, Robinson and Howard have been the best guys on the field at times. And so to go from where Florida was last year, where the linebackers were just a catastrophe, especially after Shamar James went out, to now Shamar James is kind of a complementary piece at linebacker as opposed to like the alpha dog at linebacker is a real difference. Yeah, there's significant concern on my end with the Jason Marshall injury with what's coming up, but he doesn't look like he's going to be back anytime soon.
Mm-mm.
Anytime you fall like that and you come back with your arm in a sling, that's not great. But what I would say is the team is playing with confidence. They understand who they are. They're okay giving up a first down or two. They haven't, other than the flea flicker, they haven't really given up a big play recently. They've given up one or two. So in this one, they gave up three explosive plays the entire game, two in the first half. And one of those was the flea flicker. One of those was a run sort of up the middle where they didn't make the tackles. And then there was a 21-yard pass in the second half on their opening touchdown drive. Other than that, the defense didn't give up much at all. If you're not giving up explosives and they're playing light boxes, so they're playing the defensive backs specifically to avoid giving up the big play. Historically, Florida's defense has played that way and has still gotten burned. So the fact that they're playing that way and not getting burned is a major feather in their cap. Again, I think you can go back and look at the tape and you can see places where KJ Jefferson had some open guys and could have made a play. You can go back and look at the tape and see, especially on some deep shots, where Nico Iamaliva had some shots and wasn't able to convert. And then you can go back and you can look at the tape and you can see places where Brock Vandagriff had some opportunities to either convert third downs or to make some plays and wasn't able to do it. Those three guys, I think, sort of uniquely are probably the worst quarterbacks that Florida's going to face on the schedule. And so I am very curious to see what happens with Marshall going down, with some of the new guys in the secondary who've stepped up. Is that going to maintain as the competition gets better and as the quarterbacking gets better? And that's just something we'll have to monitor as we go forward. I mean, the reality is if you look at EPA per play for the teams that Florida's played so far, if you look at the differential, Central Florida is kind of right where Florida is, but certainly has a lower strength of schedule than the Gators. Kentucky, way worse. Mississippi State, way worse. And the teams coming up on this, or the teams they've lost to, A&M, way better. Miami, way better. Tennessee, way better. The teams coming up on the schedule, LSU, significantly better. Georgia, way better. Texas, way, way better. And Ole Miss is actually, by EPA per play, one of the best teams in the country. So, the three teams Florida's lost to already, the profile of the next four on the schedule really kind of fits that. And so we're going to learn a lot about this defense because if the defense is real and if Lagway can hit these deep shots as consistently as he's hit them so far. To me, that's really one of the significant takeaways of this game is after the Samford game, everybody kept saying, but Samford. And I think you and I both looked at it and said, there's stuff there that has nothing to do with who the opponent was and everything to do with who DJ Lagway is. And he just put up a Samford-like performance against a real SEC defense. And so now the question is, can he do it 2 weeks in a row?
And
Well,
Will, in two halves. We haven't seen that too much out of this team under Billy Napier. We played two halves of football, and
it was kind of nice. It
there
was
was
kind of
a
nice on that third down where they got the single high safety and he threw the ball to the outside down to Badger and went for it, right?
Mhm.
And I think there has been a tendency to criticize Billy Napier for not going downfield and not sort of having that killer instinct. But one of the things I think we learned against Kentucky is that there are checkdowns that are available in the offense, and DJ Language doesn't take them. Like he lets the ball go when he thinks he's got one-on-one, and he made the right read most of the time. The only time he really screwed, well, he threw some balls in traffic on some shorter routes, and then the interception was, I think what happened there is they showed cover three at the start, and then they fell into a cover four, and he basically threw it right into a zone where the guy was going to be. And his wide receiver knew what it was because he broke to the outside and Lagway threw it to the inside, and that was the end of that one. But yes, there's an aggressiveness associated with Lagway that means you're not going to let off on the gas. Now, all that being said, they still did decide to sit on the ball
I was gonna say
heading into halftime, and
minute 30, you get the ball back, minute 30, right after a kick return for a touchdown. Lagway's just launching it. You did throw the interception. There was an interception that was returned deep into Florida territory. The defense had a nice stand on the goal line on a 4th and 1. So and then Lagway takes it down, completes. I believe it was the big pass to Badger. It was a big run from Baugh, and then it was a deep pass to Badger that takes him right down. They score a couple plays later. You kind of got to bail out there for if you're Lagway on that interception. And at one point it got to 27-20 after being up 27-6, but Florida responds. They end up closing the game out in strong fashion down the stretch. The defense stepped up. The offense continued. Like you said, they kept the foot on the gas. It was two halves of solid football despite some moments and mistakes. And I think that's the price of Lagway right now. Again, for a coach that I think we can all agree that Billy Napier, it's campaign season here in America, Will. So we're fed a lot of propaganda. I think one of the biggest pieces of propaganda we've ever been fed as Gator Nation is scared money don't make money. Because boy, he must be a nervous guy watching the ball fly that far through the air sometimes with Lagway. Because I think he had to have seen this, but he just goes, I'm not willing to eat the 5 to 7 mistakes a game, big mistakes a game I'm going to get. Because I mean, you even see there's a few times with Lagway where he's turning around on a handoff, or he can make some play. Like there was even a couple ugly plays on that first drive at the end there where he's running into a blocker. It looks a little scrambled at times with him. It looks a little scrambled, and you can tell he's a freshman, but the price is worth it, man. Like it might end up costing us a game or two down the road. But if this team, it's not like we had an elite defense. If you have an elite defense and you want to play like Les Miles ball from LSU back in the day, where you just need Matt Mock to score you 17-21 a game. That Graham Mertz is your guy for that. I think this team needed it. I definitely think it also has to be good for the team mentality and the team chemistry. People keep complimenting the Gators on the fact that, hey, this isn't a team that's packed it away. I mean, it was a rough start those first few weeks, and this is a team that's fighting hard. Well, one of the reasons, a lot of young guys are getting the opportunity to play. This is not the same team we saw against Miami. This is not the same team we saw against Texas A&M. Quite literally, these are different players on the field in a lot of cases, and you're seeing guys like I think like a George Gumps, for example, take an expanded role. You're seeing some guys who have stepped up and earned it, and you're also seeing some guys step in by necessity. And maybe there's some rotation pieces that they had to make decisions on that they weren't ready to pull the trigger on. They clearly weren't ready to pull the trigger on. I mean, we saw those rotations with the offensive line against Miami, for example. Things have settled down a little bit more with this team, but you also have to look at the last three opponents we've played. UCF has been a mess this season. They're not the greatest team. They just blew a big lead at Iowa State. They had the lead over Iowa State the other night. They blew a big lead in Ames, ended up losing that game. Uh, Tennessee, big win over Alabama. That was a great performance that we shot ourselves in the foot. We lost that game. We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in that one. And then in this game, you come out, you have a strong performance against a team that went on the road and handled Ole Miss a couple weeks ago. So, hey, I think Kentucky plays some solid defense, and I think that defense is no joke. And you come out there and put 48 up on the Wildcats. That's a big deal. We've seen Mark Stoops shut down this offense in the past. But what Florida did on defense, it's a weaker Kentucky offense. They've struggled against a lot of people, but what Florida did on defense should be applauded, but should be lauded, but it also should be noted the last three offenses have had their struggles in other places as well.
Yeah, I mean, so it's Kentucky, right? And it's Central Florida. And Tennessee's top 10 team. So at least right now they're a top 10 team, just took out Alabama. So they're Florida is proving over the last 3 weeks that they have the capability of playing with anyone. The issue, and this is something that we've talked about all offseason, is that, unless Mertz was going to take a giant step forward in terms of not just his efficiency, but going down the field, the offense was going to be in that 40th to 50th range, which is exactly where they were. I mean, they were 51st coming into this game in offense in the country in terms of yards per play, and they were 51st last year. So they were right against FBS opponents. So that
Hmm.
subtracted Samford. So when you subtracted Samford from the deal, they were the exact offense this year that they were last year. And the problem is that when you have a defense that's inconsistent or at least or bad before the last three games, but now I think we can say, hey, look, we're trending in the right direction. Even in that case, an offense that's 50th in the country is not going to be good enough to beat the Georgias of the world and the Texases of the world. Now, all that being said, Kentucky was 31st in the nation in yards per play allowed, coming in at 4.9 yards per play allowed. Florida averaged 8.1 yards per play against the Wildcats. And to put that in perspective, Florida gave up 7.7 yards per play against Miami. And we looked at that and we're just like, that defense is putrid. Like, that was an awful performance. So Florida's performance against Kentucky was better than Miami's performance against Florida. And I bet you there were a bunch of Wildcats fans who kind of felt like Florida fans did when Florida took on the Hurricanes. The thing is, there's been no in between for Florida this year. Like, Kentucky is sort of the best opponent that they've played and beaten, but I don't think anybody thinks the Wildcats. I mean, they're going to get bowl eligible probably, and they're going to play some middling bowl. Okay, well, that's not where Florida really wants to be. Central Florida, maybe they get bowl eligible, maybe they don't. Mississippi State won't be bowl eligible at all, and Samford's obviously FCS. So the teams Florida's beaten so far, nobody in there, like, we're not talking Penn State, USC, Ohio State, like those quality of opponents. We're not talking about that. And the teams Florida's lost to, Tennessee, Miami, and Texas A&M, are all very good teams, right? They're 6-1 or 7-0, and so there is no in between for us to sort of gauge. And Kentucky is kind of the closest to being in that in between phase. And for this season, we just don't get that. Like, Florida's schedule is so high end that they're about to play four teams now that are in that top tier. And it's very easy for me to see a situation where we just realize Florida cannot compete with those top end teams and they run off a string of four straight losses here. And the tone of the program completely changes, being 4-7 heading into that game against the Seminoles. There's also a scenario where Florida is competitive in all four of these, especially if Lagway can continue to be consistent. And if he can, and Florida's competitive, and maybe they get one or two of them. Well, now you're a bowl eligible team against this schedule. I think we all feel a little bit better about things given where Florida's heading in this schedule. In a very rare scenario, you got something where maybe they go 3-1 in this stretch and Lagway just lights it up, right? And now you're really talking about something because you're probably going 4-1 to end the year. You're ending up 8-4. And if you'd have told me before the season 8-4, would you take it with DJ Lagway playing like a star? I think we all would have said, yeah, of course Napier's
I think we
got
would have
his
called
job
that the best
still.
case scenario
We
about
would have called that the best case scenario. So the best case scenario is still out there. I think it's really unlikely.
yeah.
And the reason I think it's unlikely is really because of what we've seen from DJ Lagway so far. So if you look at his QB rating against Miami, it was 60. Against Samford, 265. Against Texas A&M, 76. Against Mississippi State, 191. Against Central Florida, 205. Against Tennessee, 109. And against Kentucky, 191. So there are a lot of highs and there are a lot of lows. Same thing if you look at his yards above replacement. Same thing if you look at his PFF ratings. Like, everything is ebbing and flowing. And I've got an article that's going to be coming out later this week that it might even be out by the time this gets posted, where basically you can plot Florida's winning percentage versus quarterback play, like PFF quarterback rating. You combine both Mertz's and Lagway's QB rating, and you can it's a line. It's a 95% R squared value on the line when you plot those two variables, and so or when you plot EPA differential versus quarterback play. So we can talk about the defense all we want, but the reality is Florida is going to win games because DJ Lagway wins them games, and he's about to head into a gauntlet. I suspect he's going to be inconsistent, but I do think he might get him one. I think there might be an opportunity against an Ole Miss or against an LSU, even in a shootout, even if the defense doesn't play that well. Like the idea that he could go out there and just change the game with a bunch of big plays, and all of a sudden, you're up 14 points in the swamp against LSU or up 21 points in the swamp against Ole Miss. Like those are opportunities that still exist that I don't think would have existed in our minds with Graham Mertz at quarterback. And again, I don't think there's a shot at Mertz. It's a recognition that DJ Lag was with Gatorade Player of the Year last year in high school, and those skills are translating. At least some of those skills are translating, and the elite skills of being able to create those explosives down the field are really significant. So do we get a bunch of Kentucky games in a row? Do we get a bunch of Samford games in a row? I doubt it. I think what we're going to get is we're going to get one of them. And the question is going to be when we get that one, is Billy Napier wasting timeouts? Is Billy Napier like screwing up the time at the end of the first half and the second half? Are there 12 men on the field for special team stuff? Are there false starts that put him in situations that limit him and those sorts of things? And all of those mechanical things, all the execution things, we already wasted one against Tennessee. Right? There was an opportunity to get that game in Knoxville and they weren't able to do it. And neither quarterback really played that well in that game either. And they still had an opportunity to get it. So if you get that one game from DJ Lagway, I think you're going to have to take advantage of it. Because I do think they'll be in at least one of these four. And then it'll be like last year. Are they able to get the game against Arkansas? Are they able to get the game against Missouri? Are they able to get the game against Florida State? Those were three games they had an opportunity to win and just were not able to do it. The question will be this year when they get that big time performance from Lagway against one of these elite opponents, are they able to do it? And I'm fascinated to see whether they can do it because it'd be nice to have a bowl game to talk about this year.
Do the 5 to 10 big mistakes from Lagway per game hurt you less than the 5 to 10 electric plays that do you basically do the 5 to 10 electric plays way more at the end of the game than the 5 to 10 mistakes he's going to make as that true freshman? So that's the interesting part to watch. But overall, Will, specifically regarding the play calling, obviously you tailor a little bit to Lagway, probably a little. We saw a little more RPO with him, but didn't really. What differences did you see with the offense with Lagway versus Mertz outside of the check down versus all gas approach?
Well, I mean, so they threw the little crosser to Arliss Boardingham on a third down, and he got stopped short. And it was pretty clear at that point that Kentucky was playing the offense as though they thought it was going to look like one run by Graham Mertz.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a play on the second drive where Lagway actually missed DK on a flood. He really didn't get his feet set, and he got the ball to the right spot, but didn't get it there accurately. And the announcers even made a comment about you need to watch his feet and make sure that he's setting himself and that sort of stuff. And I didn't see I didn't see play calls that were different. What I saw was a quarterback who is reading defense differently. That Lagway has the natural instinct of I'm waiting for that deep guy to come open. And what that means is he's going to take some more sacks because there are going to be times where that deep guy doesn't come open. And when that deep guy doesn't come open, now the pocket's going to collapse. And sometimes he can get away and sometimes he can't. And a couple of times deep in their own territory, there was one drive where he made three straight throws. And on the third throw, he was looking to take a deep shot and it wasn't there. And he sort of got flushed out of the pocket. And then he just had to throw the ball out of bounds. And you look at that and go, okay, the defense won that rep. But if he can, the problem right now is the interceptions, right? That there are if you take the Samford game out, he's got 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And some of that is because Badger kept getting tackled at the 2 yard line. But some of it is also that, he has thrown a ton of picks given the number of throws that he's got so far. So he's got 5 picks and 86 throws overall, 5 picks and 61 throws against FBS opponents. That's something we need to look at. But I don't think the offense changes in terms. And look, I mean, I would say the same thing about Dan Mullen's offense when Felipe Franks went down. I don't think the offense changed when Kyle Trask came in. I think what you saw was a quarterback who processed the information quicker than Franks and so was able to find the open guy. And so the thing that actually made me most excited was after Kentucky came down and after they tied or after they got within 7, Lagway hit DK on a crosser where it was a flood concept and he had the deep guy in 1-on-1. He had the shot and he didn't take it because DK came wide open
He was
across the
so
middle.
open. Yeah. Yeah.
But my contention has always been, and this is why I harp so much on completion percentage in high school, is that completion percentage at the high school and college levels, because of where the hashes are and because the way defenses are much more limited than in the NFL, my contention has always been that completion percentage, if you're going downfield, is not indicative of a guy who puts the ball right on the guy's numbers every time. It's indicative of the guy who finds the guy who's open and puts enough air under it that he can run under it. And if you go back and look at those explosive plays, I challenge you to go find a play where Lagway threw the ball to a guy who was in double coverage and he just won the battle. Every time he threw the ball deep, the guy either was wide open, like DK in that case, or he was single covered. Now, there were a couple of times where he threw into traffic, and I'm not ignoring those, but it's sort of what you said. Like if you get 6 times where he throws to the right spot where it's 1-on-1 and his guy doesn't even have to win the battle. The guy wins it at the line of scrimmage and he's got 3 yards in the defender and Lagway can just throw it up and let him get it. Those sorts of things, getting it to the right spot, to me is the thing that I look at and I just go, that's what's different. What's different is he's willing to wait for that deep guy to come open. And look, I mean, there was in the UCF game or Central Florida game, there was a play where Mertz dropped back and Austin Barber pancaked the defensive end. And they were kind of rustling around maybe 2 or 3 feet away from Mertz, and Mertz kind of felt it a little bit. But it was a single high safety look, just like Kentucky was running all day long against Florida, and they had double posts. And when you have double posts going at a single high safety, you're going to get one-on-one coverage on one of those guys because the safety has to choose. Is he going to double on one guy or is he going to double on the other? And and somebody actually who had access to all 22 film sent me a screenshot before Mertz let go of the ball, and it turns out that the safety tripped. Like the safety's on the ground. And so now no matter who you throw to, he's going to be wide open. And Mertz pulled the ball down and he ran the ball for a first down. And you look at that and you go from a success rate perspective, that's a really good play for Mertz. He converted a second down into a first down. You got a new set of downs. Hey, the ball matriculated its way down the field. How successful? But I look at that and I go, that's a wasted opportunity. You got the coverage you wanted, you got the play call you wanted, and you had the opportunity to take the shot and you didn't do it. And because you didn't do it, yeah, you got a first down, but you could have had a touchdown. And so the difference here in quarterbacks is that when Lagway has an opportunity to get the touchdown, he's going to put it up. Now, he's going to get caught a few times. There's going to be some stuff, especially, I guarantee you, Kirby is not going to, like, I would say probably 40 to 50% of the time, Kirby is going to show a coverage and change it after the snap when they come in because both teams are coming in off a bye, right? And so since both teams are coming in off a bye, he's got 2 weeks to look at that film and prepare. And what he's going to see is he's going to see a guy who, when he knows what he's getting, is able to put the ball where it needs to be and is able to take those deep shots. But what he's also going to see is a guy who, when you change the coverage post snap, is still not processing it quick enough to make that adjustment. I expect Georgia to make a lot of changes post snap. Now, there's some disadvantages to that. You get your guys out of position if you do that. If the quarterback sees what you're doing, you're going to have guys who can't get back in position, and you're still going to be able to hit those deep shots. That'll be the question. Can Lagway process that quick enough right now as a true freshman, or is Kirby going to be able to outsmart him essentially just because he's young, not for any other reason other than this is his third start. And look, I mean, if you got a true freshman who's already doing this kind of stuff, it's impressive on its own right. And to ask him to grow to be able to take on a Kirby Smart defense when Kirby's had 2 weeks to prepare is asking an awful lot. But look, we've sort of all offseason said it's DJ Lagway or bust for Billy Napier and for the Florida program. And so, Georgia is sort of where the boom or bust comes. And if Lagway goes out there and just is lights out and lights up a Georgia defense and Florida can pull this one out. I mean, I told Gator Dave on Gators Breakdown this week, I had it 99.5% that Georgia was going to win this game 2 weeks ago, maybe even 99.9. I think it's probably 85-15 at this point. But the fact that it's 85-15 is almost solely based on what's happened at the quarterback position and that the defense looks quasi competent now. And so if you can get a few stops and sort of offset some of those mistakes that you get from DJ Lagway, well, now you got the opportunity to experience the upside as well.
I think we did a good job going through each unit of the defense, really talking about, certainly the defensive front being more active. The linebackers have had much better play. We're seeing the secondary tackle, and they're not blowing as many coverages as we've seen in the past from this group here. And we're seeing a lot of young guys step into roles maybe a year or so earlier than we expected, and really stepping up and playing well. Are we seeing? I know Roberts is up in the booth versus on the sideline. I know they've made some changes, but what what are we doing significantly different than what we did at the beginning? I know you mentioned that we're not necessarily more aggressive, Will, but is there any other major things that stand out to you with this defense? Like what actually changed with this defense in the last few weeks?
Yeah, it's interesting. During the bye week, I remember you asking me what I thought they should do, and I was like, I think they need to bring an extra linebacker in and just sort of admit that things are going to struggle. That you need more speed up there, and you need somebody who's a little bit more versatile. They've done that a little bit. They've played 3-3-5 a lot more often
Hmm.
than some of the other things that they were doing earlier. They're still doing light box, so they're playing a lot of middle field open type coverages. They're dropping a lot of guys in coverage. They are playing a ton of zone compared to man. So from a conservative perspective, they are daring the opposing offense to run against them. And unlike in the first 4 games of the season, where Miami, the first play of the game, Florida was there, they had them stopped maybe at a 2 yard mark, and the ball went flying 5 yards forward just because Miami was able to push them. They haven't got pushed around. They're winning individual battles. And part of that is the guys they brought in. So Pyburn has been absolutely awesome at
Piperine's playing
setting
good
the
too.
edge.
Yeah.
Like he's not a dynamic pass rusher, but he's really solid in run support. But guys like Tyreek Sapp are starting to win battles. Guys like Des Watson are starting to win battles. You got guys like Kelby Collins who are starting to win battles. The big thing, I already mentioned the linebackers, where you've got Howard, you've got Jaden Robinson, you got Shamar James, who are starting to win battles. These guys are winning one-on-one battles when they get up close to the line of scrimmage. And so, yeah, even in the Kentucky game, it wasn't like they didn't give up any rushing yards. I mean, if you look at it overall, it was a good performance because they made them. I mean, it took them 36 rushes to get 144 yards. That's still 4 yards per rush, right?
Hmm.
It's not like that's a fantastic performance on the ground. But what they were able to do was set up third downs for Vandegrift, where Vandegrift had to make a play. And when it came time for Vandegrift to make a play, there were a few out there that he probably left out there, but there were also some plays that Florida made. And when you're putting pressure on and we've seen this with Florida for the last 2 years with Mertz, is that when you put pressure on a team to convert third downs, they will eventually not convert it. And they'll go through a dry spell, and there will be 2 or 3 drives in a row where they make a mistake, or where they have a false start, or where you get a holding call, or you get something that sort of throws them off schedule. And now that third down conversion becomes much more difficult. And so we even saw it early in the year against Miami. They were sort of playing bend but don't break the first couple of drives. And then the dam broke because everybody got tired, and also because the offense couldn't do anything. I think in some ways, having the confidence that the offense can make up for a mistake allows you to be more aggressive. But the big thing to me is Bridges isn't a guy we thought was going to start the year. We got Robinson, wasn't a guy we thought was going to start the year. Pup Howard coming in, it was like, yeah, we hope he's good, but we didn't know if he was going to be a guy who was going to start the year. You got Aaron Gates. Okay. You've got Devin Moore, who's somebody we highlighted in our preseason magazine, who's back and healthy now. You've got Sharif Denson, who's out there starting to make plays. So you start naming, even Jordan Castell has been more physical. And so you start naming these guys who are stepping up. And for the most part, the guys who are on the field are not. The Pyburn is a great example. The guys who are on the field are not the guys we thought were going to be the guys to step up. but they've put this new set of folks in there, and those guys have stepped up and they've won playing time and they've won the job. So congrats to them, because I honestly didn't know how they were going to turn it around. I think a little bit of it's scheme. This is definitely, though, Ron Roberts' defense. Like, this is something that he learned at Baylor. Being more conservative on the back end and winning up front was how Baylor's defenses under Dave Aranda were good. He was much more in the Austin Armstrong camp of, we'll put people out of position with simulated pressures and things like that because we're going to get to the quarterback and we're going to blitz a ton. The blitz rate in the first 2 games of the year, I think, was up around 33 or 34% for Florida's defense. It's down to 26 overall for the entire year. So they've been blitzing less.
Which
They've
is
been playing
crazy because
coverage more.
they seem to be getting home so much more frequently now
Well,
than they were early on.
when's the last time you saw a defensive lineman in coverage?
Right.
It's pretty rare. Now you're seeing the linebackers, and Gums sort of qualifies as an outside linebacker.
He's a hybrid
He
edge
is.
guy, yeah.
But when's the last time you saw a defensive lineman in coverage in an area where he was exposed? They've stopped doing that crap. The simulated
Man, it
pressures
only
and all
took them
that
two
stuff.
years to figure that out.
Well,
That's
I mean,
good.
the simulated pressures are great when you get home. Like, if you watch Georgia against Texas, there was a lot of stuff they were doing that was driving them crazy.
Oh man,
And
there's one look in particular that they just did at the last second where they got two guys up the middle. It was unbelievable. It was
well, and
unbelievable.
again, when you've got the personnel on the back end to be able to survive when you do those sorts of things, not necessarily just thrive. Like, in many cases, it's survive, right? And the problem with those simulated pressure type defenses is the same thing I said about teams that are changing what they're doing in coverage, specifically post snap, is it leaves your guys out of position. And so if you're going to run those simulated pressures, you got to get home, or at least you got to get home on a fairly regular basis, because if you don't, now your guys are out of position and you can get exploited. So what's happened the last couple of years is Florida hasn't gotten home, and so they've gotten exploited. And what's happened over the last 3 weeks is two things. One, Florida's been able to win some battles up front. So they've even gotten home when they haven't tried to trick the offense. They've just been able to get there. And then the other part of it is that they haven't left their defensive backs in its, or their linebackers, or even their defensive linemen in a situation where they can be exploited, even if they don't get home. So yes, we can look at those throws that KJ Jefferson missed, or that Brock Vandegrift missed, or that Nico missed, and say, they missed those throws. At the same time, there was a Florida defender close enough that the throw had to be good, that it couldn't just be something where he kind of floated it out there and let the guy run underneath it. He had to drill it in. And if it was a yard high, okay, well, now it's an incompletion. And Florida's defensive backs haven't been that close in many cases, I think, because they've been trying to trick the offense. I think they kind of stopped that. I think they basically said, this is who we are. We're not going to try to trick you that much, but you're going to have to execute. And we think that some of these new guys we put in here are going to win some of these battles. And by winning these battles, we're going to then put you in a situation where you got to convert on third downs consistently. And look, I mean, Carson Beck has not been great this year so far.
Nope.
And is he going to be able to convert on third downs, critical third downs? Like, if Lagway really leans, like if Lagway hits a couple of deep ones to start with and Florida's up 7-0, 14-0, 13-0, something like that, whatever the score is, and all of a sudden now you got a third down and that stadium is bumping and the Florida fans are smelling it and they're like, wow, like, this, and, and Florida's able to get them in 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. Is Beck going to be able to pick them apart, or is he going to start misfiring? And that's going to be the question. And, I'm not incredibly confident that Beck is going to misfire, but I'm a heck of a lot more confident today than I was 3 weeks ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, his stat line was not too impressive out of Texas. That Georgia defense really did a lot of the heavy lifting out there.
Well, they scored what, 13 points against this Kentucky team. So, it's not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually something that's been interesting. You watch Alabama go down again on the road to Tennessee, and yeah, it's the appropriate reaction, I think. But Georgia does not look invincible. Texas was looking great, but then you look at Texas's schedule and you go, I mean, you and I both picked Georgia last week. We do our weekly picks on Patreon, which is free if anybody wants to check that out and be a free member of our Patreon. We put up weekly picks, 5 picks a week, and we both picked Georgia. I needed to see Texas prove it against big time opponent in the SEC, and Georgia had one bad half of football against Alabama, but what we're seeing from Alabama, I know people want to talk about DeBoer and it's a new regime in Tuscaloosa and everything. I think you're just not going to see those machines we saw in the 2010s. And honestly, look at the playoff picture right now for college football. It's incredible. This season is it feels like there are a lot of teams out there that can actually make a serious run in the playoffs right now. And I don't think there's that one clear cut. I mean, if you had to pick one team that was your clear cut favorite, I'm pretty sure most teams aren't going to want to play Georgia right now. Pretty sure most teams aren't going to want to play Georgia. But man, it is just you're seeing the difference in the game already. I didn't think this effect would hit so quick. But the NIL has picked apart the depth of some of these top teams where it's not that a guy gets injured and Alabama replaces him with a guy who's going to be a first round pick in the NFL draft next year who you've never heard of, who's been in Tuscaloosa for 3 years sitting on the bench. You're not going to see that very often anymore. And I think some of the depth comes into play starting midseason here. It's going to be interesting down the stretch, Will. I think we're seeing the new day and age in college football has definitely arrived.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna toot my own horn a little bit. So right after that Alabama Georgia game, I think we came on here for Stand Up and Holler, and you were like, "Well, I guess Alabama's in the playoff." And one of the things I said was, Kalen DeBoer's played a lot of one-score games in his career at Washington, and this is another one-score game against Georgia, and that pixie dust wears off. And if you play a bunch of close games, you're eventually going to get bit. Now, not in my wildest dreams did I think he was going to get bit by Vanderbilt, but you play close games, you're going to get bit. And they've gotten bit a couple of times now with these close games because it turns out when you're not in the Pac 12, when you're not playing close games against Oregon State and Washington State and those teams that they were winning by one score last year, when it turns out you're playing close games against Georgia and against Tennessee, and yes, even Vanderbilt this year, when you're playing close games against those teams, they have an opportunity, and that's probably a 50-50 proposition. The other thing is, and this is something Florida fans should be heavily, heavily attuned to, is given what we've seen over the past decade, I hope that Florida fans really appreciate what they had with Steve Spurrier and what they had with Urban Meyer. And both of those guys had warts, right? No doubt about it. Spurrier probably less than Meyer when it comes to like how he's seen within the fan base. But those guys were transformative coaches who got the most out of their players when they put them out on the field. Nick Saban was like the epitome of that. He's gone. And it turns out that Kalen DeBoer is not Nick Saban, and what a shock. So Malachi Moore is still there. He's still playing. He's just kicking the ball against Vanderbilt and getting all sorts of penalties and having a hissy fit at the end in a way that Nick Saban would not have allowed. Now, Saban also isn't going to lose to Vanderbilt. And so I do think that there's that being angry at losing to Vanderbilt probably not the worst thing in the world for a guy like Moore, but I don't know that this is a depth issue. Now, maybe Saban saw this coming, and maybe that's one of the reasons he stepped aside and all that sort of stuff. But I really don't think this is a depth issue. I think it's when you've got a guy like Nick Saban, you're lucky stars that you have a guy like Nick Saban. When you have a guy like Urban Meyer, you should count your lucky stars that you've got Urban Meyer. When you've got a guy like Steve Spurrier, you should count your lucky stars that you've got a guy like Steve Spurrier because those guys don't come around very often. And you don't have to go too far to see it. You go up to Ohio State where Ryan Day wins every game except for the ones against top 10 opponents, and they're about ready to run him out of town because he's not Urban Meyer. And Ryan Day is not Urban Meyer. Ryan Day's a damn good football coach. He's won a lot of games for Ohio State, but he's not Urban Meyer. And I think he's established that he's not Urban Meyer. And it turns out that at Ohio State, losing to Michigan and Oregon is a problem given what they want and given what the boosters are paying for NIL and all those sorts of things. So I think all of this stuff, all of this to say that the parity in college football really comes down to the quality of the head coach. And I think that's one of the reasons why you still think that Georgia is probably the class of college football. Because at the end of the day, that's a guy who's won multiple national championships with Stetson Bennett at quarterback and and has had teams that, I mean, I think Georgia was the best team in the country last year. I'm pleased they lost to Alabama, but and knocked them out of the playoff, but I think they were the best team by leaps and bounds. And so those are just sort of the things that happen in college football, and it's one of the reasons why I love the sport, right? I mean, who would have come into this season thinking Vanderbilt's going to take down Alabama? Who would have come into this season thinking that Vanderbilt was going to play somebody and it was going to be a top 25 matchup, which is what we've got this week with Vanderbilt's game. So strange times in college football, certainly sort of a reordering of the world order. And man, is Oklahoma having a tough time integrating into the
Oklahoma and
SEC?
Texas, welcome to
It's
the SEC,
yeah,
baby.
seriously, like
That's I would normally root against Georgia in that spot. There's part of me that was pulling for Georgia on Saturday because I'm not ready to hand Texas is not walking into the SEC and just taking this thing over. Right? And man, I think Georgia fans are pretty rough. Texas fans are probably right there with them if you give them that taste of victory that early in the SEC. So I'm glad to see that they got a rude welcoming and 32-3 at halftime for South Carolina over Oklahoma. You just a few years ago something like that would have shocked anybody, but they're missing like all their receivers. They have no offense to speak of at Oklahoma right now.
well,
It's just
I
brutal
will
to
say
watch.
I will say it is interesting how these teams that we think of as less than in the SEC are starting to jump up and snipe some of the powers from time to time. I mean, Vanderbilt obviously is the number one culprit there, but even you think about South Carolina, they've stepped up and sniped a couple of people. Think about Florida, they have an opportunity maybe to step up and snipe somebody. It's been really interesting to see that the middle of the SEC seems to have enough to be able to come up and get some of these higher level teams. It's one of the reasons why
Did the
Florida.
middle go up or did the top come down a little bit
I think
though?
the top came down. You look at
Yeah.
Milrow and how and it's really all about quarterbacks. So last year, Jaden Daniels was head and shoulders the best quarterback in the country, but Jalen Milrow was really, really good. Brady Cook at Missouri was good. Carson Beck had a QB rating up around like 165 or 170.
Mm-hmm.
Beck's down at like 140. Milrow's throwing pick after pick after pick. You've got Cook has been much, much worse this year for little Eli there and Nico hasn't been as advertised, at least as a 5-star recruit, and the NIL deal they gave him, he hasn't been as good as I think we thought he could have been coming into there. So you combine all of that stuff, and the teams that have the best rosters don't have the best quarterbacks. Whereas last year, the teams that had the best rosters also had the best quarterbacks, which is why you got that separation. And this is what it always comes down to. This is why the Lagway experiment is so fascinating. I mean, it is entirely possible that DJ Lagway has played poorly because he's getting a third of the first team reps. So both times that he's gotten all the practice reps, he's come out and he had a yards above replacement. That's my stat where 2 is Heisman worthy, 0 is average. He had a yards above replacement of 8.9 against Sanford, and he had a yards above replacement of 7.1 against Kentucky. But he was also
So you're
3.6 against
saying three
Mississippi State.
Heisman's for DJ Lagway
I'm
based on
saying
that
that
set?
I'm I said this on Gators Breakdown this week. If he stays at Florida and they get any semblance of a defense, the dude's gonna have a statue. Like he will if he can stay healthy and he stays at Florida and they have any semblance of a defense, the guy's going to have a
Which
statue.
during the NIL era, which I do think we talked about this in the offseason a bunch, where like, the conversation about patience and everything within the program. And I think I really greatly underestimated the value of NIL in being able to, I think if anything, you have a better shot of keeping players that you want to keep within the program because of NIL.
I,
You have something to actually dangle out there, and not that the other moves around it won't matter, but like I do feel like you come in, he's got a position. The number one thing, especially after the way this season started, the number one question that I want to walk out of the 2024 season with is DJ Lagway the guy? Is he that guy that we think he can be? And the fact that we're getting the opportunity to see this play out, uh, is a great thing for the future of this program right
yeah,
now.
well, I mean, look,
So
I think the reality is NIL from the standpoint
'cause
of
we know he's worth all the dollars right now if he continues down this path right now.
well,
That's going to answer the question right there.
well, and that was sort of where I was going, which is that so let's say that you have a new head coach next year And I hope Napier wins out. I hope he proves us all wrong. But let's say you've got a new head coach next year. That guy's going to have to sell boosters to open up their wallets to help with recruiting classes. Like that's going to be a big, big part of his job. And if he walks in and says, I need extra money for DJ Lagway, is anybody going to say, nah, I'm not sure? Like, I don't like the hope that that kid brings to the program overall is so significant that no one is going to chisel Billy Napier if he comes and asks for more money or a new head
Yeah.
coach if he asks for more
DJ,
money. So,
renegotiate.
so,
Renegotiate, man.
so if DJ likes Gainesville and DJ likes whoever is installed as head coach,
Yeah.
DJ is going to get to dictate where DJ goes,
I
right?
think
And
he's going to be
that,
able to
that's
go
just
back to the table this
well, I
offseason
mean, again,
on it.
I don't know what the deal was to begin with, but yes, I mean,
That,
we saw the UNLV quarterback come in and go, "I want more money."
that went well.
Like, well, I mean, so it didn't go well, but I suspect he didn't have the leverage that DJ Lagway does. So, yeah, we'll see where it ends up.
Well, we're heading into the dreaded 5 game stretch to finish the season. By the way, 7th game of the year in the books. Gators sitting at 4-3, heading into this 5 game stretch that, I mean, we've been hearing about this thing the entire offseason. So it's finally here. Georgia at Texas versus LSU versus Ole Miss at Florida State. Will, you dream of it. It's just, you just recite it in your head every night, right? Florida
I mean,
State not looking so scary. Not looking. I mean, they look scary. It's a different kind of scary. I have.
Tallahassee Community College football
Woo!
program out there,
They
man.
they have fallen off the cliff. It is brutal to watch.
How'd they beat Cal?
Yeah, Cal's offense struggled that night, man.
Oh
I don't
man.
know. They couldn't do much on offense. But that FSU offense right now is just it's just something to watch at the moment. So I've been trying to tune
I'm
into
enjoying
things,
every minute.
kind of enjoying it. So I'm getting some satisfaction out of watching that. But yeah, I watched that Duke game on Friday night last week. It's just three turnovers in a row on 3 plays in a row. That's just unbelievable stuff
Well, they
there.
weren't fluky either. It was a couple of really bad picks sandwiched between a fumble and a scramble.
Yeah. And
Like, oof.
I saw some Twitter accounts say nobody beats the Duke Devils 23 times in a row.
Well,
Nobody does it.
you've even got them on Twitter now. For those who've been following the Solo Cup fiasco, where some Florida State fan on Twitter promised that he would eat dog crap out of a Solo Cup, and the going joke now is that Florida State is cursed because he refuses to do it. Now they're like faking eating dog crap on Twitter, trying to
It's
end the
just
curse. It's like they're having seances up there in Tallahassee, and I'm enjoying every minute of it, man.
that's been one positive of the 2024 season for sure. But looking at the rest of that stretch, so I think if you put the Florida State game in the win column at this point, you're sitting at 5. If you can pick off one, you're bowl eligible. And I know that's not the standard, but considering the way it started, that's not a bad finish to the season. But Georgia versus LSU, or Georgia at Texas versus LSU versus Ole Miss. Let's start with the first two. We got Georgia and Texas. Obviously, these are the teams that are in the thick of the playoff hunt at the moment. Definitely preseason favorites coming in for the playoffs as well to make the playoffs at least. Uh, we saw them step on the field together and what that looked like. Does the Texas performance, I think with Georgia, I think most people are picking Georgia to win that game. I think Georgia's going to be a pretty hefty favorite in that game. So if we look, I know Lagway's a wild card, and we can talk about it, but that would be a monster upset if we beat Georgia. Everybody agrees on that, I'm pretty sure. So let's look at that Texas game on the road. If you're if you're Florida going into Texas, I think this Texas roster is really good. They played a tough opponent in Georgia, but the offensive line has been pretty solid for this Longhorns group for the last couple of years. I think Quinn Ewers been playing some good ball, and they got a lot of weapons on that offense. Florida would have to really show up with their best defensive performance of the season to give them a chance.
Yeah, I mean, so here's what I'll say: is that Texas also coming off a bye week before they play Florida.
I believe so, yes.
Texas and Georgia, by just about all metrics, are two of the best teams in the country.
Yep.
Um, I think those are tall tasks for Florida in
Yep.
both cases.
Yep.
I think 2 weeks for Kirby to prepare for Lagway, and really 2 weeks for Sarkisian to prepare for Florida and Lagway. Um, these are teams that can out physical you, and Florida has struggled when they've been out physicaled. And yes, they out physicaled Central Florida and Kentucky and Mississippi State, but it's a different animal to go in there and try to for a fresh Georgia team that's coming off of a week, a fresh Texas team that's coming off of a week off. Like those are going to be very difficult asks for Florida. I don't expect Florida to win either of those games. I don't think we expected them to in the year, and I honestly don't think it's fair to ask them to do that. I think there's one of these four that they have a chance to get, and we'll get to that one.
So you got LSU and Ole Miss at home. Let's start with LSU. LSU's an interesting team. We're going to find out a little more about them this weekend. They go on the road to Texas A&M. Somehow A&M's a favorite in that game. I think A&M's playing some good ball, but I would think LSU would be favored. But LSU ends up winning a game against Ole Miss a couple weeks ago in overtime. Did not lead at all, and they end up scoring in overtime to win the game. They've had some close wins. They've had some. They're an up and down team. They had to battle it out. South Carolina, the USC game was not the greatest loss looking back on it, considering USC is just really struggling. They're not even struggling with the top of the Big Ten, Will. They're losing to Minnesota and Maryland. They're not they lost to Maryland this weekend on the road. They don't like traveling east very much, but I don't know. Maybe we could convince LSU it's the first weekend of September or something like that because Brian Kelly doesn't seem to love those weekends too much. But this LSU offense, they've had their moments this year where they've looked really good. They've had some other moments where they struggled. It's kind of an up and down football team. They only have one loss to this point, but I don't mark them as an opponent that we couldn't hang with at home. I think that's a winnable game at home.
Well, I think it comes down to quarterback play, and this is the space where I think Florida really has an opportunity. So Garrett Nussmeier is the quarterback there. I've made a bunch of jokes about not trusting a Nussmeier at quarterback or on the offensive side of the ball this offseason, but I think that's true for Nussmeier specifically. He has a QB rating of 147.4. That's basically SEC average. He doesn't add anything in the rushing game. He's got 9 rushes for 16 yards overall. His yards above replacement is point 0.1. So he is an average quarterback. And so what you have is a defense that was terrible last year and has made some strides to be a little bit better this year. And you have an offense that's kind of average. And so what happens is when you look at the overall EPA per play differential between offense and defense, considering that Florida was really awful in the first 3 or 4 games of the year, even when you put those in there, Florida and LSU have very similar advanced statistic profiles. And part of that is because Florida's kind of got an average quarterback play when you put Lagway's performances and Mertz's performances together. So to me, that's the question is if Florida gets a Lagway performance, I talked about one of these four, he's going to pop. And I don't know which one it's going to be. If he pops against LSU, Florida wins by 30. Like that's just the reality is that if he really is able to take a step forward at home against LSU and put up one of these performances where he's just bombing them, Florida's going to win by a ton because LSU and Nussmeier are not going to have the ability to keep up. I don't think you can say that about Georgia. I don't think you can say that about Texas. And I don't think you can say that about Ole Miss either. But you can say that about LSU, that LSU historically has been a team that when Florida and Trask went in there with Burrow, like Trask couldn't keep up with Burrow. He tried, he tried valiantly, but he couldn't keep up with Burrow. Last year, you had Mertz go in. He wasn't able to keep up with Jaden Daniels. Well, now it sort of goes the other way if Lagway could take that step. Now, Lagway might be awful, right? I mean, Lagway might have one of those down days. And then LSU absolutely has the opportunity to win that game and probably wins that game. But, coming into the year, I would have said it's more likely that LSU has a blowout than it's a Florida win, and Florida's win will be close. Like it'll be a close game. As it's more likely that a Florida win would be a close game than a blowout. Probably more likely that an LSU win would be a blowout than a close game. That's what I would have said coming into the year. I think that's flipped. I think it's more likely that Florida wins in a blowout than in a close game, especially because Florida has some game management issues. I think it's probably more likely LSU wins in a close game than a blowout, and that's just a complete flip. And so I do think that that it's an interesting place for Florida to be because I do think that narrative flipped a little bit. That's the one. Like that is the game where I think they have an opportunity to get one, and we'll see if they're able to do it.
And then the last one here at home on senior day is Ole Miss, who also is coming off a bye, by the way. So Georgia comes off a bye to play on top of the schedule. Georgia comes off a bye, plays Florida. Texas off a bye, plays Florida. Ole Miss off a bye to play Florida. But before that bye week, Ole Miss faces the Georgia Bulldogs and Vaught Hemingway. They play Oklahoma and at Arkansas the next couple of weeks. They should get those games. They should get those games. I mean, you could get a tough test any week in the SEC. Arkansas on the road is not a guarantee. I know that, but I just don't think Arkansas has the firepower to keep up with Ole Miss. If you look at the Georgia game, though, well, I if Ole Miss were to drop against Georgia, which odds are they're going to, but if they were, that would put them at 3 losses in the SEC. You're eliminated from any type of playoff contention. I would think with this schedule because I don't think they have the big enough wins to really back it up. They're big games that kind of that would mean they fell flat in every big game they've had. So you got 3 losses. You're out of SEC contention for sure, probably out of the playoff. What type of team would be coming to the Swamp if they lose to the Georgia Bulldogs on November 9th?
Um, I mean, I think it kind of depends on maybe where Florida is and where Lane Kiffin's head is. This is the Florida State model, right? And maybe Norvell has done it to the extreme, but you got in order to do what they did last year, you have to have a Jordan Travis at quarterback, and then you have to hit on all of the guys you brought in. So they hit on Keon Coleman. They hit on a bunch of the defenders that they brought in. And then Georgia broke them in the bowl game, and they haven't been the same since. And Ole Miss is going through the lesson that I think most people learn, which is that the transfer portal, there's a reason guys transfer. And when things get hard, a lot of times there's a proclivity for those guys who transfer to look around and look at what else might be out there. And so the idea of going through the fire when things get difficult is something that these guys haven't necessarily been conditioned to do. Now, you do get Florida State situations where you hit on everybody and everybody gels and everybody hits and the quarterback's playing great and all that sort of stuff. And look, Ole Miss still has an opportunity to turn this around. If they win out, they're going to be in the playoff. And if they lose one more, they might still be in the playoff. So I think that's kind of the thing is I think they'll kind of be playing for their playoff lives if they lose that game to Georgia coming into Florida at this point, given what's on their schedule so far. And so I don't expect it to be something where they've fallen apart and there's a bunch of infighting and all sorts of stuff at that point. I think it's going to be one where if they lose to Florida, I think that could happen. But I don't think that's going to happen until after that game. So I expect a good Ole Miss team to come in. I think Ole Miss's underlying statistics are better than their record. We talked earlier
They
about
did both games they've lost. They've been in both of them. I mean, the Kentucky game was ugly, but what they lose by 7 in that game,
Yep.
and they lost by in the last play to LSU. So they're not that far off from being undefeated.
Well, so we talked earlier about one score games, right? One score games are 50-50 propositions.
Mm.
So it's not that Ole Miss shouldn't have a loss. It's that it's pretty unusual that you would lose two of those games and not replace it with some close victories as well. So that doesn't, I mean, it's still a 50-50 proposition every time you get in one. So just because you lost two doesn't mean you're going to win the third one. Like it's a coin flip at that point. But that is sort of the point, right? Is that it's a coin flip. So in their coin flip games, they're 0-2, and they've dominated in all the other ones, which is why their underlying statistics are so good. And so you don't dominate by being a soft team. You don't dominate by being a team that's ill prepared. What happens is sometimes you get out there, a few things go wonky. They had a fumble in that game against Kentucky that really sort of changed. I think Kentucky fumbled on their way into the end zone, right? I
Mm.
mean, how often does it happen where you fumble a ball and recover it in your end zone for a touchdown? So not only did you not turn the ball over, but you also got 7 points and didn't have to fight through the Ole Miss defense to get there. So there were some funky things that happened in that game, and I think this is a pretty good team. So I am not bullish on Florida's ability to take out Ole Miss. In fact, if you asked me Ole Miss or Georgia, I'd probably tell you that given what Florida has and given the quarterback play at Georgia thus far, Florida probably has a better shot at beating Georgia, which scares me to say those words, and I think I will probably rue them. But I don't anticipate Florida beating both. I don't anticipate Florida beating either. So,
That
so
might that might be more of a statement about Georgia than than Florida.
well, I think it's a statement about Carson Beck. It's a
Yeah.
statement that, his QB rating this year. So his QB rating last year was 168. His quarterback rating this year is 146. And so he hasn't been good. He's been average. And if I'm going to sit there and kill Nussmeier for being average, then I got to kill Beck for being average too. And he's protected in many ways because of his he's protected in many ways because of his defense, because of Kirby, because of all the things that they can do there. Again, Nussmeier, his yards above replacement, 0.11. Beck, his yards above replacement, 0.20. Jackson Dart, 2.73.
Wow.
So there is a huge difference at quarterback between Ole Miss and Georgia and LSU. And I haven't done Quinn Ewers, but I'm sure, assuming that he hasn't transferred by the time Florida plays them, that that Ewers is going to be up there in that 2 to 3 range as well. Maybe 1.5. He hasn't been quite as effective as some of these other guys, but at a quarterback level, I think Texas and Ole Miss have a real advantage. Again, this is one of those things where Lagway, if he pops in one of these games against Ewers or against Dart, he's going to be helping Florida keep up. If he pops against LSU or Georgia, he's going to have an opportunity to really lean on quarterbacks who thus far have not shown the ability this year to be able to really take the team and put them on their back. And look, I think the second half against Alabama, Beck was pretty good. But the first half, he looked like a deer in the headlights.
Mm.
And, so that exists within him. And the question will be, one, can Florida's defense pull that out of him? And two, when you get him down, are you going to be able to keep him down there? And are you going to be able to essentially put the ball in his hands and say, go get it? And maybe he can, maybe he can't, but at least you sort of put him in that situation where you've tested that.
Well, the dreaded 5 game stretch is finally here. I think this is a team that it's been an interesting season to this point. I definitely feels it's been a positive few weeks here overall. It's been enjoyable to watch this team progress in certain ways. Obviously, we've had our frustrations along the way too. That Tennessee game was certainly frustrating, but there's been you could pull some positives out of that Tennessee game as well. But this team heads into a 5 game stretch at 4-3. We'll see how it goes. We will be here each step along the way. We'll be back next week to do a Georgia preview during the bye week. Everybody enjoy your off Saturday. In the meantime, Will, you got any final words before we get out of here?
Well, I did just look up Quinn Ewers, his QB rating 148.2. So I stand corrected. He's right there with Beck and Nussmeier. Texas defense has been really good. So, there's an opportunity there to maybe lean on Ewers and make him come back. And certainly Georgia did that this weekend and he wasn't able to do it. So maybe when I take a closer look at that one, I will have a little bit more faith in the Gators. But no, I mean, it's nice to have some hope. Like, after that Texas A&M game, it was like I've never been so checked out of a season after 3 weeks.
Mm,
And it's just like, because we all knew what was coming, right? And that A&M game felt like one of those where Elko being a new head coach, you had the backup quarterback, we thought the defense was going to take strides, and all of a sudden you're looking at a bottom 10 defense in the country having lost to a team that really we kind of put in the toss-up category, but it was like if you were being honest, we were sitting there going lean Gators on that one.
hmm
And this season very easily a couple of bounces go Florida's way. They're 5-2 heading into this one instead of 4-3. And so the fact that they've been able to play with and even dominate some of their opponents in the last few weeks is really encouraging to see. I've said this repeatedly. I'm not going to root against my team. I want Florida to do well. I know there are people who are sort of out on Napier, and believe me, I understand the reasons, but I'm not going to root against my team. I want them to win, and it's nice to have that touch point to be able to have a positive conversation with someone about the team has been a really sort of has been an uplifting thing. And to be able to go into the bye week off of a dominating win against an SEC opponent. We talked about the Samford game and then some of the games right after the A&M game. And it's like, okay, yeah, you beat Mississippi State, but going to the bye week, like, what does that buy you, right? It doesn't really buy you anything. It's like it's not going to quiet down the noise. Nobody cares that you beat that team. I think this Kentucky game is different. I think the noise has changed a little bit. People are at least willing to go, like the teams Florida's lost to have been really good. Teams they beat haven't been great, but the teams they lost to are really good. And so where Florida sits in that hierarchy, are they like lower middle class? Are they middle class? Are they upper middle class? Like they're not Elon. They're not Elon Musk, but where do they stand in there? I'm interested to see. I think everybody's interested to see, and certainly the next four games are going to tell us that. The fifth one is just a cupcake.
And I think coming into the season, a lot of people expected this team to be middle of the road, so it's not shocking that's middle of the road. What was shocking was the non-competitive nature of the first two. I don't know if I'd call the Tennessee one shocking. That was kind of like more of the same of what we've seen the last few years, some of those mistakes. But the first two were just so non-competitive. You can't, this program in year three, you can't be non-competitive. It's one thing if you don't get the job done and don't win in a week, but just to be that non-competitive in those first two games that really set the tone early on. So it's been great to see them dig down and quite frankly, you should beat Kentucky at home. You should beat UCF at home. You should handle some of these games. You should go to Tennessee and compete hard. Yes, you're Florida. You should do those things. So I think Florida is doing what they're supposed to do, what they're expected to do. You're not going to win them all the time. That's common sense in any sport, but you want to see them. This program should never be the type of program that just gets their doors blown off the way we saw in those first couple losses. So that's the big thing you want to see in this 5 game stretch is really just a team that has done what they've done the last few weeks. Granted, I don't think the opponents have been that strong the last few weeks. I think the Kentucky win's nice. In the off, I think Kentucky's a good team. Kentucky is a good football team, but compared to what we're about to see, I think Kentucky's pretty average compared to what we're about to see on that. So, you just want to see us go out there and play super competitive. It'd just be a tough out, and even against the top teams, even against like a Georgia and the Texas on the road. You want us to be a tough out at the bare minimum with a chance to pull it out in the fourth quarter. That's what you
Well,
want to see out of this team.
yeah, absolutely. And this year, one of the things that I said repeatedly was, I want certainty. Like, I want to know, is Billy Napier the guy? I want to know, is DJ Lagway the guy? And so if Florida goes out and lays an egg and goes 0-4 in this stretch, I think we get an answer to the Napier question at least. And hopefully we get an answer to the Lagway question. We're certainly going to see enough snaps that we will get an answer to the Lagway question. And, you know, the challenge will be if you end up in that 6-6, 7-5 range now you don't have that certainty, but I think if you have the certainty at the quarterback position, it changes the narrative a little bit. So,
I think the
look,
certainty can come from the nature of the losses so far. And I'd say the nature of the losses so far, not so good. Not
well,
so
I
good.
mean, I'm not ready to change my opinion on what Florida should do, but I am ready to accept that I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And before I wasn't even willing to accept that I was wrong. I pretty much had my mind made up. If Florida goes out and convincingly beats Georgia, we got a real discussion about where this program sits, right? I don't expect that to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think, every time I've gotten my optimism up, Florida has absolutely and Billy Napier have absolutely crushed me, and so I'm sort of going into this. I've certainly got my eyes wide open, right? And I know what Florida's walking into, and I know that this is a difficult stretch. At the same time, I'm gonna wake up on Saturday at a cocktail party excited to watch the game. And I would say that I woke up on the day they played Tennessee. I wasn't really excited to watch that game. Like I was going to watch it and I was, I'm always interested to see what happens. I'm a football nerd. I enjoy seeing that stuff. But I didn't expect Florida to be competitive and I expected it was going to be one of those things where oh God, like I'm going to have to write an article that talks about all the shortcomings of the team and I still
Here's
wound up
another
doing
deep
that.
ball that Nico hit.
Well, and I still wound up doing that because of all the coaching stuff that went on in that game. But there has been a turning of the tide where I have much more optimism going into these games. And look, I mean, optimism, moral victories, all that sort of stuff, none of that matters. Billy Napier's got to win some games. But he's got the opportunity to do that now. And he's got the quarterback in place that we all know or that we all suspect has the ability to do that for him. And so the combination of those two things, it's going to be fascinating over the next 4 weeks. And like I said, I hope we get some certainty coming out of those 4 weeks so that Gator Nation can heal, so that we're not sitting here constantly bickering about
Well,
is
you
it the right
can't
move?
do
Is
we
it
can't do
not?
stay
It's
the program after every game either. Can't be stay the program after every game either. So I think you got to let some things play out. And I think there's talk about on Napier earlier in the season, but I think this season just at this point, let the season play out, let it go. And the guys are fighting. There's young guys that are getting playing time that look to be playing well. Give them a shot to play through this tough stretch. We'll get well. I think we're going to get what you want, Will. I think we're going to get that certainty by the end of the year on both
Yeah,
those questions. So
that was
that's the good news. That is the good news in the
that
2024
was
season.
always the benefit of this schedule. Is this
Yeah.
schedule? No one was going to be able to say, "Yeah, but you didn't play anybody." And so,
Right, right.
at the end of the day, Florida will have played somebody and we'll be able to evaluate them against the elite in the country. We know they will have played multiple top 10 teams by the end and probably five or six top 10 teams by the end of the season. And if that's the case, we'll be able to evaluate where does Billy Napier stand against the top tier teams in the country and be able to make real determinations about that. Now, whether the people who sign the checks will make the same determinations we do is an open question, but we'll get that certainty, and I'm excited to get it.
Well, on this bye week, we can all be Vanderbilt fans to go beat Texas, right? So let's see another Diego Pavia outburst. So that'd be fun to watch. That'd be fun
I'm
to
here
watch.
for it,
Hopefully
man.
they can follow it up.
I'm here for it.
All right, everybody. Have a great week, everyone. Enjoy the time off. Maybe it's a time to go outside and breathe some fresh air on a Saturday. I'll still be watching games. I'm sure you will be too. So we'll still be watching games, but enjoy. And we'll be back next week with a Georgia preview for Will Miles. I'm Nick Knudsen, and as always, go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.